because you are being ambiguous. You're taking the spotlight to the real victims here. Do not use the woman card because you are such a liar. This is the evidence that Laila de Lima
Gaganap ngayon sa International Criminal Court.
Ilang araw na lang.
ICC.
Maya-maya lamang po ay magsisimula na ang confirmation of charges hearing laban kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte.
Pero bago tayo tumuloy sa ating live feed, mahalagang linawin sa ating mga manonood, hindi pa ito ang mismong trial o
tama.
paglilitis.
Tama, ito ay parang preliminary hearing pa lamang, Karen, at ating mga kapamilya. Susuriin po ng pre-trial chamber kung sapat at matibay ba ang mga ebidensya ng prosecution upang iakyat ang kaso sa isang ganap na trial para sa mga akusasyong crimes against humanity.
Ako po si Karen Davila.
Ako po si Adrian Ayalil. Ito ang Duterte sa ICC, an ABS-CBN special coverage.
So guys, ang kaganapan po ngayon dito sa ICC ay makikita po natin ha. Ayan no, mga kababayan natin, ito nandito ang mga pro Duterte. Ayan, nakikita nyo ko konti. Mga kababayan, sa kabilang paligid naman yung nagsasalita dyan ay mga anti-Duterte, mga ka-GPnatics.
but not here. Why? So you can use his face to ask.
Ayan o, pre-Duterte nakalagay. So ito yung mga pro Duterte.
You're scared that your pockets are being hurt because you ask money from the European
Kala ko marami sila.
America.
Bakit ito lang?
Europe, America, the West.
Oh.
We are already poor enough. Why are we giving money to these narco politicians?
Wala pa guys, hindi pa nagsisimula. Si Digong, yan pa rin.
Money to this.
Ito kasi yung sa International Criminal Court, di pa nag-start. Ang waiting 1,000. Grabe yung ABS-CBN, no? 10,000 is watching.
NGOs that are being deceived by the bad actors in their speeches in the Human Rights Convention.
Anyway, batiin muna natin ang lahat ng mga naririto ngayon. Happy Daisy, good afternoon. Ma'am Yuki Sawaki, Sir Romulo Bumanlag, Naomi Shin, Sir Michael Pangan, good afternoon. Meron na kayong may wifi na kayo, salamat naman. Susan Gonzalez, good afternoon. Tita Ning, thank you so much for watching. Samahan nyo ako guys at huwag nyo pong kalimutan mag-like muna habang tayo po ay nag-aantay ng confirmation of charges against kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte dito po sa ICC, the Netherlands.
That's a real tyrant sitting.
Ma'am Jenny Ramos, good afternoon.
Sheikh Hasina, murdered. Sheikh Hasina.
Okay, sa mga pwede po, mag-like na kayo.
Students in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a signatory of this fucking court.
Ayun, nagsasalita pala ngayon pro Duterte, mga kababayan. Yung kanina nagsasalita, naririnig ko sa background, ay anti-Duterte naman.
But Sheikh Hasina
Pero ang konti lang nila, no?
is court and
Kala ko ba madami kayo? Mga, DDS. Ilan lang to, wala pang 100, oh.
where is that on Yahoo?
Ano ba yan? Bakit ganon? Nasaan na yung mga nagmamahal sa tatay nilang karton? Ang dami niyong naka-live, Sir GP. Ay, dami ba? Okay lang yan, walang problema. Ganun talaga, mga kababayan. Sir Leo, magandang gabi.
We should have been supporting the severity of Venezuela.
Ang lahat naman talaga nakaabang talaga ngayon. Diba? Kahit puntahan natin yung mga DDS, mga ka-GPnatics, kanina nandun sila sa Supreme Court. No? Hindi ko lang alam kung nakatutok sila ngayon dito.
And yet you can say, oh, sovereignty for Venezuela.
Wala pa rin hindi pa rin nagsisimula
A sovereign country.
Jennifer Ramirez, good afternoon.
International law. But we cannot support
Madami sila kaya lang troll, sabi ni Ma'am Bidelina.
Duterte.
Oo nga naman
Let us not be two-faced here.
Wala pa rin.
I plead the international community. And I ask you, international media,
bawat media company doon sa loob ng trial room or trial court. Karen.
Okay. Kat, paano yung pamilya ng mga biktima? Nakausap ko kanina si Attorney Nery Colmenares at sinabi niya may mga representante daw ang pamilya ng mga biktima. Alam mo ba kung ilang mga kapamilya, ilang representatives of the victims ang nandun sa loob ng chamber?
Karen, pagdating dun sa mismong anak noong mga namatay dahil sa extrajudicial killing noong panahon ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, mayroon tayong 3 na nakita na pumasok kanina. Yung 2 nakausap natin ay yung kapatid ni Efraim. Ito yung cellphone technician na natagpuang patay na nakabalot ng packaging tape yung ulo at nagtad ng bala yung kanyang katawan sa Pampanga. Si Shira Escudero nandoon na sa loob.
Joel Sarmiento.
Si Nanay Lori Pasco, ito naman yung namatayan ng 2 anak na lalaki.
Annalisa Ancheta.
Sa war on drugs. Kanina nakausap natin sila, Karen, at nakilahok sila doon sa mga rally dito sa labas ng ICC. At kwento nga nila, pinabubulaan na nilang mariin yung mga paratang sa social media na taxpayers money daw o galing sa kaban ng bayan yung kanilang ginastos para makarating dito sa ICC. Ayon sa kanila, pinag-ipunan nila ng ilang taon yung pamasahe, yung pang-accommodations at yung iba pang dito, at nagpapasalamat din sila doon sa mga humanitarian groups o doon sa mga grupo for human rights na nag-ambag-ambag para mapuntukan yung kanilang biyahe at week-long stay dito sa The Hague sa the Netherlands.
Grabe din mga ka-GPnatics yung mga inabot, no? Sabi ko nga kung dito yan sa Pilipinas, talagang baka ngayon wala na yung mga tawag dito mga ka-GPnatics, yung mga nag-file ng case laban kay Rodrigo Roa Duterte, yung mga pamilya ng biktima, baka wala na. 'Di ba? Nawalan na rin sila ng loob. Biro mo yung propaganda na ginagawa sa kanila na kesyo daw kaban ng bayan yung ginagamit sa kanila, 'di ba? Para lang mawala po yung nila, yung loob mga ka-GPnatics na magpatuloy dito sa laban na ito.
Okay, now si Attorney Nery Colmenares at Attorney Cristina Conti, sila ay nasa grupong Rise Up. Yun ata ang pangalan ng grupo nila, representing some of the families of the victims. Nakapasok ba sila? Are they on the floor?
At Karen, when we say doon sa floor mismo, doon sa haharap o sasagot sa mga hukom, hindi ko sila nakita sa initial na lista.
Wait. Ano sabi niyo po? Mic niyo po malakas audio pero sa video pinapakita niyo po mahina. Ay, sa kanila po yun, yung video. Mahina talaga, guys. Kahit pakinggan po natin, sobrang hina po talaga nung ng video nila. Mahina talaga yan, naka full volume na. Oo.
Pero nakita ko kanina si Attorney Cristina Conti na nakapasok doon. Actually, nakita ko siya na pumipila na papasok ng ICC. Sa ngayon, Karen, sa kasamaang palad, bulag tayo sa nangyayari sa loob ng mismong courtroom. Kaya hindi natin makita o hindi tayo makapag-annotate kung sino-sino yung mismo nang nakaupo doon. Sa ngayon, ang inaasahan lang natin ay bibigyan ng opening statement na magbibigay ng opening statement yung prosecution at yung defense. Hindi pa natin inaasahan ngayong umaga yung magiging statement naman ng mga victims counsel. Ito nga yung panel na pinangungunahan ni Attorney Andres Butuyan at ni
Loveless
at nung kanyang mga kasamahan pa doon sa victims representatives. Karen.
Okay, Kat, kasama natin si Adrian Ayalin sa studio, ang ating co-anchor. May tanong rin siya para sa iyo, kakausapin ka namin kasi nandyan ka na eh. Live ka na on the scene.
Sayang ang pagkakataon, Kat. Kamusta yung mga kababayan natin dyan, yung mga supporters ng dating Pangulo? Talagang hanggang mamaya ba, hanggang alas 3 ng hapon sa inyo dyan, alas 10 ng gabi dito sa amin sa Maynila, dyan ba sila talagang magmo-monitor? At saka may chance ba, Kat, ganun pa rin ba yung schedule? Kasi di ba mahaba yung schedule ngayon dahil na rin sa kalagayan ng dating Pangulo. Pero dahil hindi siya dadating, maaari bang mabago yan?
Adrian, so far, dun muna sa schedule, wala pa tayong update kung ano ba yung magiging takbo noong pagdinig ngayong umaga dahil kakasimula pa nga lang nito at magdedesisyon pa yung mga pre-trial chamber 1 judges kung mabilis ba o mabagal yung pagsusad ng kanilang pagdinig ngayong araw. Unang araw pa lang po, so marami pang time. So
Okay lang po, loveless.
kung gaano karami yung ebidensya o kung may
Lovely less.
na mga witness yung magkabilang panig sa trial.
Kala ko loveless pala.
Ngayong umaga. Kung makikita nyo sa aking likuran na ongoing ngayon yung performance, yung creative performance ng mga taga-suporta ni
Big
dating
service.
Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Ito yung tinatawag nilang si Lucky Charm. Kumbaga, ito yung sagot nila doon kay Juana Change, yung performance artist na kilala natin sa ilang mga rally sa Pilipinas. Ngayon, ini-impersonate niya si dating senador at ngayon ay ML Party List Congresswoman Laila de Lima. May hawak siyang saging. Ito ay yung, alam natin na usual na ginagawa ng joke na Duterte supporters pagdating sa dating senadora at ngayon ay sa congressistang si Laila de Lima. Sinusubukan kong pakinggan kung ano yung sinasabi niya. Pero nagkakaroon siya dito ng monologue na sinasabi niya na victim card daw yung ginagamit. Ayan na, tinawag na si Jonel habang hawak niya yung saging. Basically, Adrian at Karen, yung nangyayari dito ay isa sa pagpoprotesta ng mga taga-suporta ng dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte.
Mga ad hominem pa rin.
Creative performance. Kumbaga, hindi lang sila nag-chant, pero mayroon din silang ito nga, creative performance. Mamaya inaasahan natin nakakanta yung isang Pilipina na lumahok sa Holland Got Talent mamaya. Mamaya pagkatapos na to, yung ibang mga taga-suporta din ng dating Pangulo naghanda ng mga puto, banana bread, banana cue para pagsalu-saluhan nila.
Wala, hindi ko nakikita si Harry Roque. Hinahanap ko nga kanina pa eh.
Yung kanilang mga kaanak, nasaan sila ngayon? Nandyan din ba? Katabi lang din sila ng mga supporters ng dating Pangulo?
Adrian, wala na dito yung mga supporters ng mga war on drugs victims dahil nga merong scheduling policy yung ICC. Yung binigay na time slot para doon sa mga taga-suporta ng mga biktima ng drug war ay alas 8 ng umaga at natapos
okay.
kaninang alas 9. So alas 9 hanggang ngayon, ito naman yung time slot ng mga taga-suporta ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo.
Uy guys, mag-like naman kayo.
Sa labas ng ICC, hindi sila nagpang-abot, walang nangyayaring bangayan o karahasan sa pagitan ng dalawang grupo. Adrian.
Kat, no? So parang ang lumalabas dyan ay napaka-organized ng sistema. Pati ang rally may oras, pati ang session days ay may oras, yung times, pati ang breaks. Kasi yung lumabas na schedule, session 1, 10 to 11, session 2, 11:30 to 12:30, session 3, 2 to 3 p.m.
Malayo sa Pilipinas, no, mga ka-GPnatics. Diyan sa kanila kita mo, kahit talagang priority na rin nila at tinitingnan yung, syempre, baka magbanggaan, yung magkabilang kampo. So, binigyan ng timeline. Itong mga ito, meron silang, kumbaga, time hour, na kung saan po mga kababayan ay pwede silang pumunta dito, magprotesta kung gusto nila, 'di ba? Pero magkahiwalay. So ngayon maiiwasan nga po yung gulo.
Kapag na-late ka dun sa time slot na binigay sa'yo, pipila ka ulit mula dun sa dulo. Ganun kahigpit yung patakaran ng ICC. So far, Karen, hindi pa natin nakikita kung mabilis ba o mabagal yung pagtakbo ng proceedings doon sa loob ng chamber. Nandoon ang ating kasamahang si Jen Hernandez, nakatutok sa isa rin yan sa dahilan kung bakit hindi siya basta-basta makalabas para makapag-report dito dahil nga mahigpit yung proceedings. Para doon sa ating mga manonood, context lamang, hindi sila pwede magdala ng kahit anong gadget, cellphone, tablet o laptop.
Ay, ganon?
Sa loob ng mismo courtroom. Kaya
pala.
Lamang yung baon ng ating mga kasamahan sa media doon. Kaya medyo mahirap din yung sitwasyon namin mga nagko-cover dito dahil sa very strict logistics ng ICC. Karen.
Okay, so si Zen Hernandez, masasabi ba nasa gallery siya kasama ng ibang mga bisita? Members of the media, are they in the gallery or they're in the courtroom itself?
Karen, the public gallery is actually situated in an area where you can directly see the courtroom. Bahagi ito ng courtroom pero nahihiwalay sila ng isang salamin as far as I know. So basically, wala sila doon sa mismong floor, pero nandun sila sa pampublikong space kung saan maaari nilang direktang mapanood yung mga nangyayari doon sa proceedings. Ang bawat isang media organization, mapa Pilipinas man o mapa foreign, binigyan ng ICC ng isang upuan So sama-sama sila doong nagko-cover na wala ngang hawak na kahit anong cellphones para makapagbigay ng update sa atin ng live. Kaya yan yung isa sa mga dapat nating abangan mamaya during the break noong court. May dalawang break, isang maikse ngayong umaga tapos may isang mas mahabang break, I think around lunchtime or after lunch. At doon lamang siya makakalabas para makapagbigay ng update kung ano na ba yung nangyayari doon sa confirmation of charges hearing ng dating Pangulo. Karen.
Okay, Kat, I'm curious, no? Kasi nandiyan ang mga supporters ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, former cabinet secretaries, the former executive secretary. Nasaan si Harry Roque, Kat?
Karen, so far, no, ayon dun sa impormasyong nakuha natin, ay nananatili sa Austria, umano ang dating tagapagsalita ng Pangulo, ng dating Pangulo rather. Matatandaan natin na nag-apply siya for asylum at yung nag-grant ng kanyang Schengen visa ay ang Austrian government at sa ilalim ng patakaran, if I'm not mistaken, ay hindi siya maaaring makalabas mula doon sa bansa habang ongoing yung kanyang application. Karen, since nabanggit mo na nga lamang yung mga important characters doon sa mga sa side ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, baka yung iba nating mga viewers hinahanap kung darating ba dito si Vice President Sara Duterte, si Davao Congressman Paulo Duterte, at si Davao City Mayor Baste Duterte. Karen, we got information from Malacanang na hindi nag-apply for travel authority si Vice President Sara Duterte at gayon din sa LG naman, sinabi nila na walang travel authority ngayong araw na ito si Davao City Mayor Baste Duterte. So hindi natin inaasahan na lalabas sila ng bansa para dito sa confirmation of charges hearing. Pagdating naman kay Davao City Congressman Paulo Duterte, hintay pa natin yung sagot ng House of Representatives kung mayroon ba siyang travel authority ngayon, pero di natin inaasahan na nandito din siya sa harap ng ICC o sa loob ng ICC. Karen.
Alright, maraming salamat Katrina Domingo. Nag-uulat ng live sa labas ng ICC sa The Hague. Babalikan ka namin maya-maya lamang, Kat.
Isang kritikal na yugto sa kaso laban kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte.
Grabe mga kababayan, wala man lang isa sa pamilya. Kala ko ba, mahal nyo ang tatay nyong karton? Pero yung sariling pamilya, si BP Sara, wala. Si Baste, wala. Mga kababayan, si Kong Pulong, hindi pa sigurado. Hindi ko alam kung si Kitty, nandyan na ba, mga ka-GPnatics, di ba? Oh. Ano yun? Wala man lang kapamilya itong si Digong. Kawawa naman, walang nagmamahal. Ay, nako!
Hihingin ang mga hukom kung mayroon bang substantial grounds o sapat na basihan ang prosekusyon para ituloy ang kaso sa isang full-blown trial.
This hearing is not a trial. The judges will not decide on Mr. Duterte's innocence.
Ma'am Lucy San Ramon.
Instead, the judges will
Oo.
decide whether there's enough evidence against Mr. Duterte.
Saan nyo po nakitang interview? Wala yung interview na yon, dati pa yon. Replay lang yon, Ma'am Lovely Les. Yung kay Sara na nakita nyo kanina tapos ini-interview rin si Kaufman, ay dati pa po yon. Okay, so ni-replay lang nila yon mga ka-GP, hindi totoong nandyan si Sara.
Muna ang lahat ng proceedings dahil sa kanyang kalusugan, nagbigay ang mga hukom ng medical accommodations, gaya ng mas maikling oras.
Wala si Sara.
80 anyos na dating lider. Ngunit sa isang huling motion, tuluyan ng pinayagan ng ICC ang hiling ni Duterte na wag nang sumipot, maging sa loob ng
Digson
courtroom
Mayas.
o via video link. Ayon sa chamber, sapat ang isinumiting waiver ni Duterte noong Pebrero 18. Gayunpaman, nilinaw ng korte na ang kanyang pag-absent ay base sa kanyang sariling desisyon at hindi dahil sa sakit. Matatandaang noong Enero 26, idineklara ng mga medical experts na fit to take part ang dating Pangulo sa mga pagdinig. Sa kanyang nilagdaang waiver, hindi pinalampas ng dating Pangulo ang pagkakataong banatan ang kredibilidad ng korte at ng kasalukuyang administrasyon.
Ma'am Lilian Robrera, shout out.
Nahaharap si Duterte sa 3 counts ng crimes against humanity para sa mga patayan
Kawawang
sa
matanda,
ilalim
no?
ng anti-drug campaign mula 2011 hanggang 2019 mula sa Davao City hanggang sa kanyang pagkapangulo. 3 ang posibleng kahinatnan ng pagdinig na ito: Confirm, itutuloy ang kaso sa paglilitis o trial. Adjourn, hihingi ng dagdag na ebidensya ang mga hukom. Decline, ibabasura ang mga sakdal at ititigil ang investigasyon.
Oh, ganun pala.
The defense nor the prosecution is automatically entitled to appeal this decision on the confirmation of charges, but they may request authorization from the pretrial chamber to do so.
Isang mahalagang bahagi ng pagdinig ang partisipasyon ng 539 na biktima. Nakakatawanin ni na Attorney Joel Butuyan at Attorney Gilbert Andres. Bagamat walang mga dahil dito, may 3.5 oras ang depensa para sa kanilang oral submissions.
Uy, grabe oh.
2.5 oras naman sa prosecution at 1.5 oras sa mga kinatawan ng mga biktima. Bukod
Mahaba
sa ito,
talaga to.
30 minuto na ibibigay sa lahat ng panig para sa kanilang opening at closing statements.
The prosecution, the defense of the suspect, and the legal representatives of victims will make oral statements before the judges.
Nakatakda rin sa Pebrero 27 ang mandatoryong annual review
Robert
para sa
Cabe.
detensyon ni Duterte sa Scheveningen. Maaaring subaybayan ng publiko ang mga pagdinig sa pamamagitan ng live stream sa website at social media platforms ng ICC. Gayunpaman, may opsyon ang mga hukom na putulin ang broadcast ng video o audio sakaling magkaroon ng talakayan tungkol sa mga kumpidensyal na bagay. Ang confirmation of charges hearing na ito ang pinakamalaking hakbang sa 10 taong investigasyon ng ICC sa Pilipinas.
Ang confirmation of charges hearing na ito ang pinakamalaking hakbang sa halos 10 taong investigasyon ng ICC sa sitwasyon sa Pilipinas. Sa kabila ng bakanting upuan ni dating Pangulong Duterte ay mananatiling nakatitig ang buong mundo kung talaga nga bang may sapat na ebidensya para ituloy ang kaso sa isang paglilitis. Zen Hernandez, ABS-CBN News, The Hague, The Netherlands.
Oh, alam nyo na mga kababayan, matagal-tagal ang ating mga pagsasama ngayong araw na ito dahil sigurado aabutin ng siyam-siyam ang confirmation of charges na to kasi 3 oras, di ba? Tapos 2 oras sa prosecution. Ay nako, mga kababayan, grabe to. Matindi talaga ang lahat nakabang ngayon.
Si Assistant Professor Michael Chu mula sa University of the Philippines College of Law. Magandang hapon po, Attorney.
Magandang hapon, Adrian, Karen.
Ayun, ready na ba tayo sa ilang oras? 5 oras?
5 oras.
Siguro, simulan natin ito, no? Para sa ating mga manonood, hindi ito actual hearing. Ang tinatawag tayo dito, pre-trial and confirmation of charges. Bakit kailangan pa ito?
Yes, nire-recognize niya na may mga priorities ang International Criminal Court. Kasi in any given case, maraming pwedeng maging suspects or akusado pero limitado ang kanyang mga resources.
Si Roberto Cabe, shout out.
Ayaw niyang sayangin ng kanyang oras na maglitis ng napakahabang kaso na wala naman palang sapat na ebidensya. Kaya ito yung parang safety valve na hindi masayang ang kanyang resources at time. Tapos, so kailangan mag-preview tayo nung ebidensya at titimbangin kung sapat nga ba ito para paggugulan natin ng napakaraming araw at buwan ang paglilitis.
Okay, so may 4 na araw, Adrian and Attorney, para dito sa pre-trial hearing and then merong 60 days. May 60 days ang ICC para magdesisyon. If sasabihin nila, may sapat na ebidensya, ituloy na ang hearing. So they have 60 days to review that. Sa kasaysayan ng ICC, nagkaroon ba ng pagkakataon na nagkaroon ng pre-trial hearing at sinabi nila walang sapat na ebidensya?
Yes, may mga kaso before na walang sapat na ebidensya yung ibang charges. So nangyari na wala at all, may charge na hindi na confirm. Meron din nangyari na may ilang counts kasi, no? So sa isang count, merong sapat, may ibang counts na hindi sapat. So tumutuloy pero reduced na yung counts.
So pwedeng scenario yung gano'n, ano? Kasi
Kailangan nyo mag-time in, time out mga kababayan. Tapos meron pa yan mamayang tawag dito. May overtime pa yan.
siya parang all or none.
Yes, correct. Lalo na 3 yung
Lili
counts
Pueblos,
dito. Option
Cheats
din ng,
Labit.
pre-trial chamber na i-adjourn, no? Kasi makikita nila parang may makikita tayo sa ebidensya. Pero at this stage, hindi pa namin nakikita na nasatisfy yung burden. So po pwede niyang i-adjourn at utusan ng prosecutor na magbigay ka pa ng iba pang ebidensya at sakasakali makikita namin makasatisfy.
Oh, eto na pala guys.
Usapan natin yung tatlong counts. Isa-isahin natin.
Yes, yung unang count niya ay yung crime against humanity of murder. Kabilang dyan yung mga high-value targets. No? So, kasama dyan yung mga nasa listahan, nakikita natin before. Marami doon sa documents containing the charges talagang redacted. No? Kasi maraming witnesses na kailangan protektahan.
Caroline
So,
Makino.
yung high-value targets will rely on their own releases. No, meron silang mga statements before, and in fact maalala natin even in the reporting and in their statements na may mga listahan ngang nilabas. Isa din sa count ay yung crime against humanity of murder, pero doon naman sa hindi natin matatawag na low value targets, pero yung mga users na alleged marami din ang kaso. Kung makikita natin yung document containing the charges, marami sa naganap na pangyayari ay yung mga raids, yung mga kasama sa Oplan, Tokhang, and a lot of those happened if you look at the documents sa Bulacan and Metro Manila. And then yung isang charge ay pwedeng aiding and abetting. So this is an important mode, no? Kasi kung hindi nila mapatunayan yung indirect co-perpetrator, meron silang reserba na kahit hindi siya yung mastermind, nag-aid and abet pa rin siya doon sa mga crimes na naganap.
Okay, ngayon, ano ang threshold o ano ang kailangang maabot ng prosecution ngayong araw? So may 4 na oras ang depensa, di ba? Meron, at I think ang prosecution, 2 ba?
2.5.
2.5 hours, and
Leslyn
the legal
Blag.
representatives ay merong 1.5. Siguro before you answer that, discuss the difference between the prosecution and itong legal representatives na si Filipino lawyers Joel Butuyan at Gilbert Andres. Tanong ng ilan, ba't di na lang sila pinagsama?
Right. Magkaiba yung kanilang purpose for representation. Yung prosecution, meron siyang technical na kailangan ma-accomplish, which is to establish na yung mga elemento ng krimen ay nangyari, no? At merong ebidensya para doon. So ang kanyang nire-representa talaga, dahil in this case it's a crimes against humanity charge, ay yung humanity. Kung sinong conscience ang na-shock dahil sa naganap na ito. Versus the perspective of the common legal representatives of the victims na yung istorya ng biktima. Kasi hindi posible na yung prosecutor maisa-isa niya yung mga istorya na iyan. Kailangan niyang kabuuang ipresenta yung konteksto. Pero dito, posibleng ipresenta yung specific cases of the injury. Bakit yan important? Kasi yung ICC is also a combination of many justice mechanisms. One of them is to be able to show the stories of the victims and for them to be able to get accountability by telling the story to the perpetrator and to the public. The other thing is very concrete remedy dito yung reparations to the victims. So hindi yan mapapakita ng prosecutor, yung common legal representatives yung magpapakita ano specifically yung pagdurusa na naranasan ng mga biktima at ano yung karampatang siguro danyos or compensation.
Oo. And it's important to note that the legal representatives of the victims are carrying 529.
Meron mamaya, Jenny Ramos, meron naka-live mamaya.
Of course, hindi po lahat ng pamilya ay nakapunta doon.
Yung tinatanong ninyo, yung pangyayari sa International Criminal Court sa loob, mapapanood natin. Ayan mga kababayan, they already started 4 minutes ago. Kaya lang wala pa mismo dun sa actual mga kababayan. Ito pa lang yung kanilang pinapakita. Ayan 4 minutes ago, 5 minutes na. Nag-start na sila, kaya lang hindi pa nagsisimula mismo yung pagbasa ng confirmation of charges. So, hindi pa nila ine-ere.
Nila is 529. And I think it's important to note that this trial will not determine the innocence or the guilt of the president.
Yes, so this particular stage in the proceeding will be able to show, I think, just the sampling of those stories kasi yun nga no, sa perspektibo ng pre-trial chamber, iba yung technical na maririnig niya from the prosecution, iba din talaga yung mukha nung pagdurusa na naranasan.
Oo. Kumbaga parang sa atin ay tama ba, attorney? Kasi parang sa atin, para sa mga Pilipino, ang pamilyar tayo, syempre yung justice system natin. Ganun din na may mga government prosecutors, tapos may private prosecutors. In a way, parang ganun din ba yung interplay ng nung prosecution at saka nung CLRB counsel?
In some respects, meron. Pero ang pagkakaiba sa atin, kung makikita natin, yung prosecutor talaga yung main player sa courtroom at ang nire-representa niya ay people of the Philippines. Sa sistema natin, yung mga biktima ay puput in a situation na sila ay witnesses. Dito talagang
Malapit na mag-start
sila sa proseso.
Okay, napapanood natin ngayon, ito po ay may 30-minute delay, no? Tulad ng binanggit ni Katrina Domingo. Pero ang nakikita nyo ngayon is the beginning. Ito ang umpisa kanina ng pre-trial hearing, no? We can call it a pre-trial hearing. That's correct, attorney, no? The pre-trial hearing. And tulad ng sinabi si Zen Hernandez po, along with other members of the media, merong one representative each, whether foreign or local, are inside the court. Nasa gallery sila, divided by a glass. Okay, let's toss it right now so mapakinggan natin.
Inside and outside of this courtroom. Madam Courtroom Officer, could you please call the case?
Good morning, Madam President, Your Honors. Situation in the Republic of the Philippines in the case of the prosecutor versus Rodrigo Roa Duterte, case reference ICC 0121-0125, and for the record, we are in open session.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I am now going to ask the parties and participants to introduce themselves. Starting by Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Could I please ask you to introduce yourself and to confirm to me whether the list of your team members that I received before the hearing is correct? Thank you, Madam President. Your Honours. The Office of the Prosecutor is represented today by myself. I'm Nyai, Deputy Prosecutor. By my side, I have James Miriti, Case Manager. I have Mr. Julian Nichols, Senior Trial Lawyer. And behind us, we have Mr. Edward Jeremy, Trial Lawyer, Madam Robin Croft, Trial Lawyer, Madam Maria Berdenikova, Trial Lawyer, and lastly, Hannah Allen, Associate Trial Lawyer. These are the individuals comprising our team today, and I thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Now, before moving on to the defence, I note that Mr. Duterte is not present in the courtroom today. Indeed, on the 20th of February 2026, the Chamber granted Mr. Duterte'S request to waive his rights to be present at the confirmation of charges hearing. Pursuant to Article 61(2)(a) of the Rome Statute and Rule 124 of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence.
Hindi po lalabas si Digong.
In this decision, number 387, the Chamber concluded that the conditions contained in the provisions were fulfilled, namely that Mr. Duterte has the right and knows he has the right to be present at the confirmation of charges hearing and knows the consequences of waiving this right. However, Mr. Duterte'S counsel is present today to represent him. Counsel, could you please introduce yourself and confirm to me that the list of your team members that I received before the hearing is indeed correct?
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, Your Honours. Indeed, the list before you is correct. May I introduce my team? To my left, I have Dr. Dov Jacobs. To my right, I have Ms. Havneet Sethi. Sitting next to her is Maître Alexandre Dezev-Dabi. Behind him, Attorney David Rancati. Sitting next to him, Maître Sandrine de Sena. And our two further lawyers, we have Nicolas Rousseau and also Kaylin Chen. And if Your Honour will permit me, there are also Filipino attorneys who are attending and supporting us today, and I'll briefly mention their names. Maître Salvador Mediadea, who Your Honours are familiar with from the initial appearance. Attorney Martin Delgra, Attorney Silvestre Bello, Attorney Alfredo Lim, Attorney César Doulay, and of course, Attorney Salvador Panello. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Maître. J'ai envie de...
Thank you very much, Counsel. I would like to now call upon the legal representatives of victims to present them, to introduce themselves and confirm to me that the list of your team members I received before is correct.
Victims participating in this proceeding are represented today by Mr. Joel Butuyan, Mr. Gilbert Andres, myself, Paulina Masida, and I confirm the list of our jurists who assist us today as provided to the court officer. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Maître Mas.
Thank you very much, Maître Masida. Thank you. On my right, I have Judge Rain Adelaide, and I have Judge Adelaide Sophie Alapina Gansu, and to my right I have Maria del Socorro Flores Liera. And I am Julia Antonuela Motok, and I am the presiding judge in pretrial chamber 1 of the court. This hearing concerns the confirmation of charges by the prosecution against Mr. Duterte. At this stage of pretrial proceedings, the OTP alleges that Mr. Duterte is responsible for the crimes that the court officer shall read out shortly. The Chamber shall not take any decision with regard to the guilt or innocence of Mr. Duterte during this hearing. Indeed, the role of the Chamber is to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to establish substantial grounds to believe that Mr. Duterte committed the crimes with which he is charged. If all or part of the charges are confirmed, the Chamber will refer the case to trial, where the trial chamber will decide upon the innocence or guilt of Mr. Duterte. The general principles to be applied at the hearing are as follows. The suspect, in accordance with Article 66 of the Rome Statute, the suspect is considered to be innocent until his guilt has been proven by the court. The burden of proof is upon the OTP, which must produce sufficient evidence to prove the charges against Mr. Duterte at the required standard of proof, at Article 61, paragraph 7 of the Rome Statute. Finally, the defense enjoys, or the suspect enjoys, all the rights listed at Article 61, paragraphs 6 and 67 of the Rome Statute. The hearing shall take place according to the schedule contained in the order dated the 26th of January 2026, document number 359. The parties and participants must respect the allocated speaking times indicated in this order. I would like to remind the parties and participants that oral remarks must be concise and that repetition of previously presented arguments should be avoided. In addition, in order to facilitate the work of the interpreters and ensure the proper transcription of discussions, please make sure that your microphone is on every time you address the court. And please speak slowly and mark pauses between each sentence. Generally speaking, the hearing will be held in open session, and parties and participants will refrain from mentioning the names of victims and witnesses. They will only refer to them by their pseudonym or their code. In order to avoid the disclosure of any confidential information, notably with regard to witnesses and victims, the parties and participants will clearly indicate whether their submissions can be presented in public or whether they deem it necessary to move into private session, notably when referring to items of evidence. The parties and participants will clearly indicate when it is no longer necessary to remain in private session. With these rules in place, we can now move to the reading of the charges in its shortened form, indicating the charges against Mr. Duterte. The full version is available publicly on the internet site of the court. The defense has not raised any objections in this regard. I would like to remind the public that the charges that shall be read out in a few seconds comprise allegations raised by the Office of the Prosecutor that the Chamber shall analyze in order to decide whether the evidence presented by the Office of the Prosecutor is sufficient in order for these charges to be confirmed. Madam Courtroom Officer, would you please read the charges?
The prosecution charges Mr. Rodrigo Roa Duterte with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of murder and attempted murder as a crimes against humanity committed between 2013 and around June 2016 and between around July 2016 and September 2018 in the Republic of the Philippines as follows. Count 1. Murder of 19 victims alleged to be criminals, including 3 children, who were killed in or around Davao City in the Philippines between 2013 and around 2016 by members of the Davao Death Squad, while Mr. Duterte was the mayor of the Davao City pursuant to Article 71A of the Rome Statute. Count 2. Murder of 14 victims labeled as high-value targets for their alleged criminality, who were killed in locations across the Philippines between around July 2016 and July 2017 by a network of perpetrators comprising state actors and others, referred to as the National Network, while Mr. Duterte was the President of the Philippines pursuant to Article 71A of the Rome Statute. And count 3. Murder and attempted murder of 45 victims, comprising 43 murders and 2 attempted murders of persons alleged to be criminals, including 3 children who were targeted in barangay clearance operations in locations across the Philippines between around July 2016 and September 2018 by members of the National Network, while Mr. Duterte was the President of the Philippines pursuant to Articles 71A and 25(3)(f in respect of the attempted murder of the Rome Statute. The prosecution alleges that Mr. Duterte is individually criminally responsible for all three of the above counts as follows. First, as an indirect co-perpetrator pursuant to Article 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute. At least between 1st November 2011 and 16 March 2019, Mr. Duterte and his co-perpetrators shared a common plan to neutralize alleged criminals in the Philippines, including individuals perceived or alleged to be associated with drug use, sale, or production, through violent crimes including murder. Mr. Duterte and his co-perpetrators implemented this common plan through the hierarchically organized structures of the Davao City Police and Davao Death Squad, and then the national network. Within the framework of the common plan, Mr. Duterte made essential contributions to the crimes in counts 1 to 3 by A. Designing and disseminating the police to neutralize alleged criminals, both in his role as a mayor of the Davao City and also during his presidential campaign and as a president, including by endorsing the anti-illegal drugs campaign Double Barrel. B. Establishing and overseeing the DDS. C. Instructing and authorizing violent acts, including murder, to be committed against alleged criminals, including alleged drug dealers and users. D. Providing personnel and other necessary logistic resources, such as weapons, including those to be used in the execution of the crimes. E. Appointing key personnel to positions which were crucial to the execution of the crimes. F. Offering financial incentives and promotions to police officers and hitmen to kill alleged criminals. G. Creating and maintaining a system in which perpetrators knew they would be protected, including through promises of immunity and shielding perpetrators from investigation and prosecutions. H. Making public statements authorizing, condoning, and encouraging killings of alleged criminals, both as a mayor of the Davao City and as a president of the Philippines. I. Authorizing state actors to take part in the anti-drugs campaign and temporarily revoking such authorization, including to placate public outcry. J. Publicly naming individuals and holding up charts from lists of alleged criminals, including so-called high-value targets, some of whom were subsequently killed. Second, in the alternative, Mr. Duterte is charged with ordering and/or inducing the charged crimes pursuant to Article 25(3)(b) of the Rome Statute, and/or aiding and abetting these crimes pursuant to Article 25(3)(c) of the Rome Statute.
Merci, Madame la greffière.
Thank you, Madam Courtroom Officer. With regard to objections and observations under Rule 122, paragraph 3 of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence, the Chamber notes that the defence submitted a number of written observations, and the last of which was on the 16th of February 2026, to which the OTP and the legal representatives of victims responded, respectively, on the 17th and the 18th of February 2026. On the 20th of February 2026, the Chamber dismissed, in its public decision, the defence's objections, in specifying that the defense and the Office of the Prosecutor are not permitted to reiterate the same arguments already presented in the findings mentioned, that they filed to date in this case, I will now ask if the parties wish to make any oral submissions on this point before moving to the opening statements. Mr. Deputy Prosecutor? Mr. Nyang, we do not have any submissions to make in this regard. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Counsel?
President, we have no observations.
Merci beaucoup, Maître Kaufmann. Donc, on peut maintenant passer à la phase.
So we can now move on to stage 2.
Wait guys ha.
Namely the opening statements, and I hand over to the Office of the Prosecutor. Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, please.
We'll then develop aspects of this evidence in more details. This case before you today, it is before you today because there are substantial ground to believe that Mr. Duterte is criminally responsible for those 3 counts of murder just spelled out and attempted murder as crimes against humanity. These charged crimes were committed during the time within the court jurisdiction, which is between the 1st of November 2011 and the 16th of March 2019. At first, they were committed in and around Davao City, where Mr. Duterte was a mayor, and then expanded across the rest of the Philippines when he became president. Mr. Duterte is charged with 49 incidents of murder and attempted murder of 78 victims, including children. These murders and attempted murders were part of a widespread and systematic attack that overall resulted in the killings of thousands of civilians across the country during the relevant time frame. Thus, the charged incidents are merely a fraction of the overall criminality that resulted from Mr. Duterte's so-called war on drugs. What is Mr. Duterte's core contribution? Your Honors, Mr. Duterte played a pivotal role in the commission of the charged crimes. His contribution was essential, as he was at the very heart of the common plan to use his words, to neutralize alleged criminals in the Philippines, including through murders. The victim included individuals associated with or perceived to be associated with drugs. One of the first things Mr. Duterte did when he became the mayor of Davao back in 1988 was to create the infamous Davao Death Squad, otherwise known as DDS. As you will have seen from the prosecution pre-confirmation brief, Mr. Duterte personally instructed Death Squad members that their mission was to kill criminals and suspected criminals, including drug users and dealers, also referred to as drug pushers. The death squads carried out this mission well into the charge period through 2011 to 2016, perpetrating the crimes charged in count 1. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte's criminal plan and his intent were no secret. he not only shared them with his co-perpetrators and members of the death squad, but also made them abundantly clear to the general public in the numerous public statements that he made time and again. During his presidential campaign, Mr. Duterte explicitly vowed to implement the common plan to neutralize alleged criminal nationwide if elected. This was his program to be elected. He publicly announced his intention to eradicate corruption, criminality, and drugs in 3 to 6 months. And this is what he said. I quote, "If I become the president, I will order the military and the police to hunt down the drug lords, the big ones, and kill them." That's what he said. And this can be found at tab 12 of the prosecution list of material. Similarly, when speaking about druggies, I quote, in a televised interview in 2015, this is again what he said. "If I become president, you will all get wiped out. I will order your execution within 24 hours. That's what he said. That I quote directly from his word. And this quote can be found at tab 19.2 of the prosecution list of materials, ERN PHL OTP 401684, page 003, and lines, these are the lines 82 to 83. And elected he was. And becoming president on 13th of June 2016, this provided him with the opportunity to follow through with his promise and to expand extrajudicial killings of alleged criminals beyond Davao and across the rest of the Philippines. He did this through the implementation of the National Anti-Illegal Drug Campaign, better known as Duterte'S War on Drug, and its project, Double Barrel. These were carried out by the national network consisting of law enforcement personnel working together with non-police assets and hitmen. Mr. Duterte authorized murder and personally selected some of the targets. During the mayoral period, when he was mayor, his clearance was required for the DDS to carry out the killings. Essentially, members of the DDS needed Mr. Duterte's green light to murder. And during the presidential period, Mr. Duterte has continued to personally identify some of the targets, including by publicly naming those he claimed were involved in illegal drug trade or in other forms of criminality. He also identified targets by holding up a list containing their name. And if you are on the list, you will be killed. And this was a word of one prosecution witness. And this evidence can be found at tab 54 of the prosecution list of materials, ERN PHL-OTP-00015-486, page 0009, and the relevant lines are 260 to 261. Mr. Duterte provided moral and financial support to the direct perpetrators as well. In a 12 December 2016 speech, Mr. Duterte admitted that he used to ride around Davao on a motorcycle looking for trouble, so he could kill. And he said, and this again his own word I'm quoting here, "In Davao, I used to do it personally, just to show the guy that if I can do it, why can't you?" And these are his own words. And this quote can be found at tab 16.1 of the prosecution list of material, ERN PHL-OTP-000155547 at 0002, lines 7 and 8. And the evidence show that Mr. Duterte's Davao City Mayor office provided some member of the DDS with a regular salary. Financial rewards were also given to direct perpetrators in the form of cash per head of killing. And at a press conference in 2013, Mr. Duterte stated that shoot to kill orders and reward are, and I quote him, are legitimate tools of government to fight lawlessness. This is his own word. And if he surrendered to me or his carcass dead, then I double the price. And again, yeah, and that was what he boasted. This quote can be found at tab 17.2 of the prosecution list of materials, PHL-OTP-000094932 at 0002, and the relevant lines are lines 7 to 11. Deaths of drug personalities killed in anti-drug operation were endorsed by Mr. Duterte's administration and listed as official accomplishment in public reporting. Your Honors, as you will have a confirmation brief, Mr. Duterte also provided the direct perpetrators with weapons, ammunition, and logistical support to facilitate the commission of the charged crime. And he also had control, wide control over those crimes. And let me now turn specifically to that control. As mayor of Davao and later as president of the Philippines, Mr. Duterte wielded ultimate influence and authority over the physical perpetrators of the crimes. As mayor, Mr. Duterte was chief executive of the Davao city government, with responsibility for exercising general supervision and control over all its activities. He had formal operational supervision and control over National Police Unit in Davao. As creator and head of the DDS, he also had de facto control over the death squad's members. When Mr. Duterte became president on the 30th of June 2016, he sat at the very apex of the political power structure in the Philippines. He became the head of state, head of government, and Commander-in-Chief of all armed forces of the Philippines. He also became the leader of the country's police forces. This level of authority allowed him to wield de jure and de facto control over those implementing the common plan nationwide. Mr. Duterte's control over the crime is also apparent from his ability to interrupt their commission when he so chooses. And as outlined in our reconfirmation brief, he successfully suspended police anti-illegal drug operation on 2 occasions following public outcries in response to particularly notorious killings. On both occasions, the number of reported killings dropped significantly during the suspension, showcasing his control. So when he asks people to act, they act. When he asks them to refrain, they do so. So they oblige. So Mr. Duterte was well aware of the authority he had over the perpetrators. In a speech given to the National Bureau of Investigation in November 2016, he expressly acknowledged his position of power. And this is what he said. To the military, I am Commander-in-Chief. On the civilian side, I am the Chief Executive of the government. And when talking about the police, this is what he said. They are my subordinate, and I am ultimately responsible for their deeds. And these are quotations. And they can be found at tab 131.2 of our prosecution list of materials at ERN PHL-OTP-00095679, page 0004, and the relevant lines are from 131 to 134. And the direct perpetrators complied with Duterte's order and respected his authority. Mr. Duterte was respected by the physical perpetrators. He was feared, and his order and instruction were obeyed. One insider witness explicitly says that the police killed, and I quote, because of the directive of the president. This is what the witness said, an insider. And this quote can be found at tab 120 of the prosecution list of material, ERN PHL OTP -000886331-R01 and page 66, and the relevant line are from 2304 to 2306. And this statement is corroborated by other statements we have also provided. And some direct perpetrator complied because of their blind loyalty to Mr. Duterte.
Yun, blind
Some
loyalty.
did it out of fear, and others were encouraged to comply by promises of money and rewards. For some, killings reached the level of a perverse form of competition with effort to attain killing quotas, which in turn would lead to promotions and rewards. Others felt there was no other choice but to comply, with one insider explaining that it was simply not possible to not obey Mr. Duterte's command. And this is also from an insider witness. And this evidence can be found at tab 51 of the prosecution list of materials, ERN PHL-OTP-0015403 at page 0008 to 0009, and the relevant line here is from 240 to 245. Direct perpetrators were further emboldened to commit crime by Mr. Duterte's repeated promises of immunity. In various public statements, Mr. Duterte vowed to protect the police involved in killing. And this is what he said again. For as long as there is a power to pardon in the Constitution, that's my weapon against crime. If you massacre 100 and there are 100 of you, then you will all be pardoned. Restore to full political and civil rights, plus a promotion to boot. It's like that, especially the high profile. And this quote can be found at tab 130.2 of the prosecution list of materials at ERN PHL-OTP and 50336 at page 0010. Such statements reassure the physical perpetrators. One insider described that he felt confident to continue killing people because he knew that he wouldn't be arrested for that. And this evidence can be found at tab 38 of the prosecution list of material, ERN PHL-OTP 0001-2779 at page 0005, and relevant lines are from 130 to 131. Your Honors, let me now say a few words about the contextual elements. The 78 murders and attempted murders that Mr. Duterte is charged with in this case were not random. These were not random crimes, nor was they spontaneous or happened in isolation. Rather, the evidence demonstrates that they were part of a widespread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population of the Philippines. The murders and attempted murders were carried out across the Philippines and over a substantial period of time. Overall, Duterte's so-called war on drugs resulted in the killings of thousands of civilians from the 1st of November 2011 to the 16th of March 2019. And many of these victims were...
Excuse me, counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Yes, were children. The victim of extrajudicial killing charge in this case were brutally murdered, some after having been abducted and mistreated. Unlike Mr. Duterte, who is represented by his counsel here today, they were deprived of any form of due process. The loss of every single one of these victims had the most profound impact on their families, their friends, and ultimately their communities. Their suffering was met not merely with Mr. Duterte's indifference, but with his mocking. In a 25 July 2016 speech, he expressly made fun of the iconic photograph portraying the partner of an extrajudicial killing victim cradling his body, which now visible on our screen. While the specific incident portrayed in this photograph is not charged in this case, Mr. Duterte's comment on it is demonstrative of his attitude towards the victims. In reference to this photo, Mr. Duterte, this is what he said. Those of you who are still sober, those who haven't tried illegal drugs, if you don't want to die or get hurt, don't rely on the priest, including human rights advocate. They won't be able to prevent death. So, don't do it. And then there you are, sprawled on the ground, and you are portrayed in a broadsheet like Mother Mary cradling the dead cadaver of Jesus Christ. That's how they are creating dramas here. This is what he said. And this quote can be found at tab 128 of the prosecution list of material at ERN-PHL-OTP-50335, page 0008. And of course, the question of whether Mr. Duterte had knowledge and intent, of course, it goes without saying. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte intended and knew that the charged crime were occurring, or that they would occur in the ordinary course of event that he had set in place and put in motion. His intent and knowledge are shown by the multiple statements he made throughout his mayoral and presidential tenure, promising to reduce crimes by killing alleged criminals, promoting the common plan, and urging police and even members of the public to kill alleged criminals. As detailed in the prosecution pre-confirmation brief, and as Your Honor will hear in the course of my team's presentation, Mr. Duterte also made statements directly acknowledging allegation of extrajudicial killings by his subordinates and issued a written order showing he knew about the crimes they committed. Your Honors, the prosecution relies on significant and varied sources of evidence to demonstrate that substantial ground exists to believe that Mr. Duterte is criminally responsible for the crimes. This evidence includes multiple witness statements, including insider witnesses. It includes many speeches of Mr. Duterte himself, as well as the statement of his co-perpetrators. It also includes orders and other documents signed by himself. The prosecution further relies on official government documents, including material from the Philippine National Police. It relies on drug watch lists, on audio and video material, as well as on forensic and financial evidence. Your Honors, during the prosecution's subsequent presentation, my colleague will elaborate on some of these core evidence in more detail. Mr. Nichols will give a presentation on Mr. Duterte's background, followed by an overview of the evidence demonstrating his responsibility for the crime charged in count 1. This will be followed by the presentation of Mr. Jeremy behind me, who will speak about the evidence demonstrating Mr. Duterte's responsibility as president for the crime charged in count 2 entry. And Ms. Croft, on my left, will then elaborate on the contextual element of crime against humanity and the mode of liability through which Mr. Duterte is responsible for the crimes alleged in this case. And to conclude, Madam President, Your Honor, while this court cannot reunite victim with their loved one, it can help reveal the truth about what happened to them and bring a sense of justice to the victim. The charge before you today are serious, and the evidence submitted require their confirmation. And Mr. Duterte must be held to account, and this case should be confirmed for trial. I thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Now we are slightly in advance on our schedule. I will now hand over to the legal representative of victims for her opening statements until 11, and then after that you shall continue. Please proceed, ma'am.
Okay, sa mga nagtatanong kung harap ba yung mga witness, hindi pa po kasi hindi pa po ito court trial, mga ka-GP. Ito po ay confirmation of charges pa lang to determine kung may probable cause ba.
Your Honors, by way of an opening statement, we convey the views and concerns of the 497 victims authorized to participate in these proceedings.
Butuyan.
At the outset, Your Honors, we communicate the very deep disappointment of the victims at the decision allowing Rodrigo Duterte not to be present in this stage of confirmation of charges. The sight of Mr. Duterte being read and being confronted with the grave and horrible charges against him would have constituted a vital component of justice for the victims. This case symbolically represents the last boat that the victims can board to go on a journey in search of justice for their loved ones who were brutally killed upon the orders of Mr. Duterte. If this chamber prevents the boat from sailing by not confirming the charges, the victims will forever be moored in an island where the nights are filled with the screams and cries of their massacred loved ones. There is absolutely no other recourse for the victims. No less than former Philippine Justice Secretary Crispin Remulla admitted just a few months ago that the door to domestic justice is permanently closed for victims of the Duterte extrajudicial killings. Remulla declared, and we quote, "It is difficult to prove the case here and build up the case because those who need to speak are involved in the crime. There's nothing, not even a police report. You don't have a scene of the crime, you don't have ballistics, you don't have DNA." Remulla further declared, and I quote, "Everything that could be erased was erased so that the cases would not push through. That is why this has reached the ICC." Under the Philippine justice system, Your Honors, no criminal case can reach the courts unless they are initiated and filed by the Department of Justice or the Office of the Ombudsman. From Justice Secretary, Remulla has been appointed as Ombudsman. So the two gatekeepers of justice are successively occupied by a ranking official who has declared that there is absolutely no hope for domestic justice for the victims. If the charges are not confirmed in this case, one of the gravest concerns of the victims is that Mr. Duterte will return to the Philippines as a conquering hero. He will resume preaching his gospel of impunity. In fact, if Mr. Duterte could threaten to slap the judges of this court, which he did while he was president, this chamber should imagine the kind of terror-filled threats and the violent actions that can easily be used against the victims if the suspect walks free from this court. If the charges are not confirmed, it is a very serious concern of the victims that Mr. Duterte will be portrayed in history by his multitude of followers as the leader who vanquished the ICC and who cleansed his country of 30,000 rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals, which were the scornful words he sweepingly used against all those who were killed in his murderous spree. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte has been in detention here in The Hague for almost a year now, but there has been no peace and rest for the victims. From the time their loved ones were killed and continuously up to this time, they lived in constant fear for their lives. The arrest and detention of Mr. Duterte has not stopped impunity in the Philippines. The virus of impunity that he spread all over the country has become a cancer that has metastasized, infecting millions of Filipinos. Mr. Duterte has created clones of himself. He converted millions of peace-loving citizens into bloodthirsty disciples who have become converts to the belief that violence and killings are valid solutions to societal problems. The killings masterminded by Mr. Duterte continue to have consequences for the victims even to this day because of his clones. These mini Dutertes harass, threaten, or commit outright violence against the victims and their families. As shown by the number of victims participating in this proceeding so far, many still fear to come out and tell their stories of how their lives became a living hell as a result of Mr. Duterte's crimes, and because they are constantly terrified of being targeted with violence by Duterte fanatics. Many victims have been hesitant to participate in this ICC case because they live in communities that thrive with Duterte clones. They see the halls of power of their country teeming with Duterte disciples. They see and hear senators, congresspersons, mayors, governors, and powerful public figures who are mini Dutertes. The daughter of Mr. Duterte is the vice president, and she has just recently declared that she is running for president in 2028. One Duterte son is a congressman. Another is the Davao City mayor, and his grandchildren occupy positions of power. The plague of impunity has spread not only among Filipinos in the Philippines, but even among expatriate Filipinos in faraway lands like here in The Hague. When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives.
Apologies, counsel, it's 11 o'clock.
When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives who avoid our own countrymen here in The Hague,
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Council. We will now take a half-hour break as provided for in the schedule, and you shall resume your remarks at 11:30. These are the rules that are set in the schedule, which was set in paragraph 18 of the decision.
Okay, sa mga nagtatanong bakit po sinasabi doon na ang mga anak ni Rodrigo Roa Duterte ay isang vice president, mga kababayan, at tatakbong presidente sa 2028, para i-emphasize po natin nila, mga kababayan, na ang mga Duterte ay may power pa rin. Okay? May power pa rin. At hindi sila basta-basta pangkaraniwang tao. Yun po ang gustong ipakita dito ng defense, ng mga kababayan, ng mga lawyers ng mga victims. Okay? So, ngayon mga kababayan, mga ka-GPnatics, meron pong tawag dito, magbi-break po muli sila ng 30 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Magbabalik po sila mamaya.
Of the decision.
Ang unang bahagi ng kanilang mga alegasyon laban sa dating Pangulo at nagsimula na rin nga yung common legal representative of the victims. At habang nakatigil po ang sesyon, balikan po muna natin si Attorney Michael Chu ng UP College of Law. Nagbabalik po tayo, Attorney.
Yes.
Ano ang mga key takeaways mo doon sa mga inilatag muna ng prosecutor?
Sige, tuloy-tuloy natin, okay lang.
Right. So nilatag niya kung paano kinumit yung crime na inaakusa sa former president. No? Nabanggit niya yung mga statements. I think part of that is kung ano ba yung nasa utak, ano ba yung intention. Kasi kasama sa kailangan patunayan is intention nilang gawin ng lahat ng ito. Hindi ito aksidente na nangyari. No? So yung mga statements na yon pinapakita ano yung nasa mental element yung ng suspect at this point. No? Makikita din yung pagkakaiba ng talagang goal ng prosecution, which is really to show yung mga elemento na kailangan nilang patunayan. So it was an overview, pero pinapakita ng overview kung ano yung kaso that they will make against the former president.
So overview muna, wala pang masyadong detalye talaga kasi medyo generic pa. Although may mga nailatag
generic pa.
Dating Pangulo na kapag ako naging presidente, ito yung gagawin ko. Pero as of now, ganun lang naman talaga yon. Wala pang masyadong detalye tungkol dun sa talagang pinagdaanan ng mga biktima.
Right. So, yung overview na yon, tinahi niya yung buong picture na ipapakita in detail mamaya or in the next few days na pag nagpresenta sila ng summary.
Parang kumbaga, big picture muna yung pinapakita nila. Tapos mamaya or sa mga susunod na session, yung kanilang mga detalye.
Correct.
Oo. Kanina, yun nga, balikan natin ilan sa mga nabanggit ni Deputy Prosecutor Niang, yung mga naging pahayag ng dating Pangulo sa mga media reports. Pag ganito ba, ano yung magiging bearing nun? Ito rin ba yung gagamitin kalaunan kung sakasakali na mag-proceed tayo sa trial?
Yes, so I think parts of it will be used, no? Kasi unang-una nga ipapakita nila kung ano ba yung partisipasyon ng dating Pangulo sa mga akusasyon na ito, no? So kasama doon yung, kasi indirect co-perpetrator siya na in layperson's term, nag-mastermind or nag-control ng buong bahagi na yan. So important for them to show na campaign promise nga niya ito eh. So talagang, at saka nanalo siya because of it. So I think it also preempts things like, I'm sure we will encounter na parang yung mga yan naman are said in jest, yung mga yan naman ay joke. So isinasa konteksto niya yung mga pahayag na yon dito sa krimen na naganap.
Oo, kasi ito nga yung isang binanggit, if I become the president, I will order the military and the police to hunt down drug lords. If I become the president, maraming mga ganon na binanggit yung mga naging pahayag ng dating Pangulo. Pero yun nga, kumbaga nilalatag pa lang yung magiging detalye na sasabihin nila.
Correct. It really also goes to kung ano ba yung mental element. Kasi siguro makikita na natin na wala
sobrang
namang,
hina ba guys?
Order. Wala namang pagsasadya. Kung meron mang namatay or pinatay, ay hindi yun dahil sa kanya, hindi niya iniutos. Pero ito pinapakita niya, ito na nga yung mga statements niya, sabi nga nung Deputy Prosecutor, galing mismo sa bibig niya itong mga to. So wala kang ibang maa-attributan ng mga statement na yan.
Yung sa atin kasi, dito sa atin sa Pilipinas, 'di ba? Kapag minsan kinuha doon sa mga media reports, yung mga pahayag at dadalhin sa korte, kailangan pa yung mga authentication. Pag ganyan ba, kailangan pang magpatawag ng mga representatives mula sa media?
May mga ibang kaso na kailangan, depende sa kredibilidad ng evidence. No? Pero on the whole, talagang tinatanggap sa ICC yung ganong klaseng ebidensya, media reports, or even things like hearsay na hindi katanggap-tanggap sa sistema natin. Kasi ang pinaka-importante sa kanila ay yung tinatawag natin na probative value. May kredibilidad ba yan at kapani-paniwala ba yan kahit pa ang source na yan ay ganitong klaseng forma?
Okay. Pero yung mga specific na mga kwento ng mga biktima, hindi pa natin narinig. Yan yung mamaya ba? Matatalakay na ba yan doon sa submission ng merits ng kaso?
Siguro ng pahapyaw kasi kahit yung sa submissions on the merits dito sa confirmation of charges ay summary lang naman. So, I think mas magiging focus syempre yung kwento ng biktima doon sa common legal representative of the victims. But even then, summary lang din. So, talagang kung makikita natin yung paghihimay-himay, doon na yan sa kung merong mangyayaring paglilitis. Dito parang preview ng anuman ang magiging kaso nila na ipepresenta.
So iba't ibang mga mukha ng mga huwes, abogado at posibleng mga testigo yung haharap sa publiko sa 4 na araw po na confirmation of charges hearing ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte sa International Criminal Court. Kilalanin po natin sila dito sa ulat ni Katrina Domingo.
Grabe yan, matindi yung
Muna
mga...
natin si Attorney Michael Chu ng UP College of Law. So Attorney, may cast of characters tayo na ipinakita doon sa report ni Kat Domingo. Siguro simulan natin doon sa judges. Hindi basta-basta yung kanilang credentials. Hindi madaling mag-apply bilang judge ng ICC.
Yes, hindi madali, lalong-lalo na at ang nag-e-elect ay yung tinatawag natin na Assembly of States Parties, no? Para maging huwes ka, dalawa kasi yung kategorya ng pwedeng maging huwes. Meron silang tinatawag na List A, yun yung mga criminal law experts, may experience sa prosecution at investigation. Yung List B naman, yun yung mga international law experts. So ginagawa yan para may mix ng expertise.
Oo, kaya sa atin, di ba si Dean Raul Pangalangan ay naging isa pa lang, ano?
Isa pa lang, pero nung una ay parang nominate yata at na-select si Senator Miriam,
si Senator Miriam,
pero hindi siya nakaserve.
Pero hindi niya, oo. So talagang si Dean Pangalangan ay Dean ng UP College of Law. So ganun pala, makikita natin na hindi basta-basta talaga makakapasok.
Oo, talagang international law expert si Dean Pangalangan, kaya siya ay na-nomina at na-select.
Siguro magandang ipaliwanag din natin sa ating mga manonood, yung mga judges ba na ito, hindi rin sila yung makikita natin kung sakali na magtuloy-tuloy sa trial itong nangyayaring confirmation of charges hearing.
Correct. So kapag na-confirm yung charges ay magbubuo ng trial chamber, yung ICC. So ibang set of judges naman yun.
Bakit ganun sa kanila? Kasi sa atin sa Pilipinas, di ba, kung sino yung nagsimula na judge or mga justice, sila na yung hanggang sa dulo. Bakit sa kanila ay paiba-iba pa?
Part of that is just division of work kasi madami silang mga kaso, but also part of it is merong mga in terms of expertise, no? At also merong mga issue na nahusgahan na ng pre-trial chamber na maaaring dumating ulit sa trial chamber at kailangan ng different lenses, impartiality also, kasi syempre yung pre-trial chamber nakarule na sila on some of it. So meron silang views.
So primarily dahil para sa impartiality.
Yes, and also it's really the design of the system. Ganun talaga nakadivide yung ICC, may mga chambers talaga siya. Ibang function talaga yung trial.
Mas maganda nga yun di ba?
Sa ang sistema sa Europe in
very
general,
systematic.
or talagang kakaiba ito sa ICC mismo talaga?
Kakaiba ito in the sense na ito yung criminal court na ganito yung sistema. Merong ibang korte sa Europe na talagang they work in divisions, they work in chambers, pero hindi in this way. So hindi ito unprecedented in their case, pero this is unique in the sense na talagang hiwalay yung set of judges for trial.
So ngayon 30-minute break ito, no? Pero ang nakita natin parang may minutes pa natapos yung presentation ni opening statements ng Deputy Prosecutor. Tapos ginamit para doon sa opening statements ng CLRV. Parang kumbaga hindi talaga nag-aksaya ng oras yung court. Ganun sila talaga.
Yes, they're really very efficient kasi nga nabanggit natin kanina, talang they're conscious of their resources, and also nakasaad din sa order na sinabi na kapag merong natapos na maaga, kahit hindi ka pa, kahit yung schedule mo ay the next day, kung nandyan ka at ready ka naman dapat, dapat sumalang ka na.
Ayun. So, yun nga, mga kapamilya, expect natin kasi 'di ba after nitong break ay magbabalik yung CLRV tapos may opening statements ang defense at saka ayun, yung CLRV at defense.
Right.
Ganito ba talaga yung design or parang ginawa lang siya para at least doon sa unang araw nakita talaga natin agad yung panig ng prosecution, ng CLRV at saka ng defense na rin. Kahit sa mga susunod pang araw magbibigay ng detalye ang defense.
Yes, ganito talaga yung design kasi I think it's also really a mix of legal cultures. No? May mga ibang sistema na may opening at closing statements.
Sa mga nagsasabi dyan na puro alleged lang daw, wala naman ebidensya. Tokmol, hindi mo kasi iniintindi. Ha? Roque Arsenio, intindihin mo kasi kung ano yung ginagawa dito sa confirmation of charges. So, ito ay parang scene pa lang, view, di ba? Ano pa lang sa atin, mga kababayan, kumbaga pinapatalas pa lang yung isip natin na ganito yung mga nangyari. Wala pa dyan yung sinasabi mong ebidensya, okay? Hindi pa yan dyan. Hindi pa yun dyan. Mamaya, o kaya naman sa mga susunod na araw hanggang dun sa trial, makikita mo yung mga ebidensya na hinahanap mo.
Sinabi ng prosecution, ganun ba yun?
Yes, it is very important and I think ito yung unang pagkakataon na maririnig natin kung ano talaga yung kanyang depensa doon sa, kasi lagi nating naririnig ano yung ginawa. No, ngayon, ano yung legal na depensa?
Oo, kasi yun nga kanina medyo nailatag na. Pero balik tayo doon sa cast of characters. May binanggit nga si Kat na yung mga witnesses hindi pa napapangalanan. Kailan natin pwedeng ma-expect yung mapapangalanan yung mga magsisilbing witnesses?
Posibleng hindi talaga siya mapapangalanan, lalong-lalo na kung continuing yung tinuturing nila na threat or security issues doon sa witnesses. So maaring hindi ipakita or putulin yung live stream kapag nasabi naman kanina na kapag may sensitive na ganong issues ay hindi ipapakita. No? So possible na talagang hindi natin makikilala yung ilan sa mga, lalo na yung mga witnesses on the part of the victims. No, siguro may ibang witnesses yung prosecution na hindi naman biktima pero will speak to other elements of the crime that we might have a preview of that in the actual submission of the prosecution, yung meat.
Yung merits,
Yes.
doon yung mga detalye na hinahanap natin. Kasi pwedeng sabihin yung mga nanood kanina di ba? Parang medyo generic yung sinabi, although may mga specific na mga naging pahayag ang dating Pangulo. Pero yun nga, big picture pa. So ang mga witnesses ang magpo-provide ng mga detalye.
Correct. At saka sa punto de vista ng korte, ang importante naman na makarinig ay yung bench, no, yung mga judges na magdedesisyon. So talagang pinoprotektahan nila yung confidentiality kasi isa naman talaga yan sa konsiderasyon kung meron bang maaaring mangyari sa mga witnesses na ito na makaantala o syempre sa seguridad nila at makaantala sa kaso kasi mawawalan ng witness kung may security issues.
Oo, at talagang sa ICC ay seryosong usapin, no, yung security ng mga parties, hindi lang naman witnesses din, 'di ba?
Right. Seryosong usapin siya dahil nga yung nature ng mga kaso sa ICC ay may kapasidad yung mga nasasakdal na gumawa ng maraming bagay tulad ng pag-i-intimidate ng mga witnesses at pag-i-influence sa kanila.
Oo, pero yung mga babanggitin, kanina nabanggit ni Kat kanina sa report niya, sina Matobato, sila Las Cañas, more or less sila rin yung makikita nating babanggitin sa confirmation of charges hearing.
Yes.
Kung talagang ipapangalanan.
Yes, baka bahagi sila. Depende din sa, may ibang witnesses naman na komportable na ma-reveal yung kanilang pangalan kasi protektado naman sila. So, posible din yun.
Kanina pala, dun sa presentation ng Deputy Prosecutor na si Mame Niang, may pinakitang mga graphics, yung litrato ng alleged EJ case. Sa ganyan ba, ano yung bearing nun pagdating sa mga judges? Kasi pwedeng ang isipin ng tao, pwedeng appeal to emotions, ganun ba yun? Or parang normal na nangyayari yung ganun sa confirmation of charges hearing?
Yes, I think normal naman yun, pero dito mas kakaiba yung appreciation natin sa kanya kasi nga itong judges na ito, wala silang picture. Hindi naman ito nila nasaksihan. So I think for the opening statement ng prosecution, sinasabi nga natin, no, a picture paints 1,000 words. So it paints the story for them.
So kumbaga parang visual aid lang para mas maipakita yung mga supposedly ay nangyari.
Correct. It captures a part of what happened.
Oo. Sa mga susunod na araw, parang ganito yung makikita natin na talagang dire-diretso rin yung gagawin ni Judge Julia Motok, tama ba?
Correct. Very efficient siya at nire-remind nga niya yung counsel na tapos na yung oras.
Oo, at saka nga kasi kanina rin medyo ganun ba, normal ba sa kanila? Parang medyo stricto na nung una meron siyang paalala na wag repetitive dapat yung mga ipe-present na argumento.
Yes, kasi recognition na din yon na limitado lang yung oras nila, no, at ang kailangan mapakita ay hindi yung nasabi na nila sa ilang mga submissions nila before. So
ayan, ituloy pa natin yan. Samantala po, paano nga ba umabot ang kontrobersyal na kampanyang War on Drugs mula sa isang lokal na pulisya tungo sa isang pandaigdigang usapin ng pananagutan? Balikan po natin ang issue sa ulat ni Zen Hernandez.
Takot na ako. Nahihirapan pa ako sa susunod na araw sa kung ano ang kaharapin namin na wala yung...
Kasama pa rin po natin si Attorney Michael Chu ng UP College of Law. Attorney, medyo nag-backtrack si Zen, ano? So sabayan natin yung pag-backtrack niya. Nagsimula ito at least sa ICC 2018, yung preliminary examination. Para sa ating mga Pilipino, ano ba yun? Parang katulad ba yun sa atin nung preliminary investigation sa piskalya? Parang ganun ba yun?
parang mahalin tulad mo, may mga similarities sila, no? Pero yung sa piskalya natin, usually mag-iimbestiga sila kasi may nag-file ng complaint, no?
Okay.
Sa atin, dito may communications pero posibleng gawin ng prosecutor on their own kapag may na-receive sila na information. Pero similar.
So ganun yung nangyari noong 2018, di ba? Preliminary examination. Pero matagal-tagal din yun, di ba? Talagang ganun ba yung masalimuot yung proseso sa ICC na kasi pwede mo sabihin, preliminary examination lang naman yan pero medyo inabot yun na matagal, years ata.
Yes, dalawa yung I think factors kung bakit siya matagal. Mabusisi talaga siya kasi alam ng prosecutor na dadaan sa ganitong proseso. May confirmation, kailangan niyang mag-request ng warrant at may kailangan i-satisfy na standard. No? So bago pa man sila dumating sa punto na yun, dapat sigurado na sila na mas access at masasucceed yung mga hurdles na yon. Pangalawa is, kung matatandaan natin 2018, iba pa ang ating Pangulo, iba pa ang sitwasyon. So mahirap sa kanila mag-access ng evidence to help them in their investigation, lalong-lalo na yung kumausap ng mga tao na nandito sa Pilipinas.
At yung paghahanap ng mga tetestigo ay mahirap din yun. Nung preliminary examination pa lang kasi, medyo nahirapan na sila dyan. Ano? May mga kinakausap na kasi yan, di ba?
Correct. Medyo mahirap talaga, tsaka syempre yung pangangalap nga ng forensic evidence, nakita narinig natin doon sa Deputy Prosecutor kanina na erase, no? Wala tayong mga crime scenes, wala tayong mga forensic evidence na pwedeng tingnan kasi nga parang walang kasong gumagalaw. Bukod pa doon, I think nag-intervene din talaga yung COVID.
Yun na nga, nagkaroon din tayo ng pandemic. Kanina, ang binabanggit noong si Deputy Prosecutor Mame ay may common plan, yung co-perpetrators. Siguro ang tanong dito, si Pangulong Duterte, nabanggit mo kanina, ay parang maituturing na mastermind. Pero bago nangyari itong confirmation of charges hearing ay may mga nabanggit ng mga pangalan, ang mga 8 kasama sina mga 2 senador natin, hindi sila nabanggit kanina. Bakit kaya?
Kasi itong kaso na ito ay laban lamang kay dating Pangulong Duterte. So yung sa opening statement, I think ang talagang ginugulan nila ng panahon is to explain the case against the former president. Maaring mabanggit sila doon sa submissions on the merits, summary of the merits, pero even then, ang kaso talaga na ito ay the prosecutor versus Rodrigo Duterte. So yun talaga yung focus. Siguro kung magkaroon ng panibagong kaso na laban talaga sa kanila, yun naman ang lalabas. Lilitaw talaga yung kanilang partisipasyon.
Kung makikita ng ating mga manonood, naka-standby pa rin tayo, no broadcast, transmission pa rin, pero supposedly 30 minutes itong break na ito. At bakit kaya merong konting delay?
Hindi natin masasabi kasi talagang siguro nagpapahinga yung judges or maybe they're discussing some points that had happened, so hindi natin masasabi. Pero nasa room lang yan sila na nasa likod ng bench. May holding room sila.
May holding room lang. Yun nga ano kaya ang nangyayari? Pag ganyan ba, yung mga judges nasa holding room, pero yung mga prosecutor, yung defense, may holding room din ba sila?
Meron, hindi. Parang nagsistay lang sila sa floor talaga. At least yung experience namin before, nasa floor lang sila.
So, aantayin lang nila talaga na babalik yung judges. Pero mamaya na may lunch break, ay meron ding may mahaba rin yun, yung lunch break. Oo. Samantala, mga kapamilya, balikan naman po natin ngayon ang mga nangyari bago tayo humantong dito sa confirmation of charges hearing. Nakahanda na po ang lahat sa loob ng courtroom sa The Hague para sa pagpapatuloy ng confirmation of charges hearing. Ito po ang ikalawang bahagi ng sesyon ngayong araw. Dumako po tayo sa ating live feed o yung streaming na bagamat delayed ng 30 minutes ay pinapakita po sa atin mula sa ICC.
Hello again. Counsel, you can continue because we were interrupted by the pause. Over to you, legal representative for victim, please.
Saglit lang guys
Thank you, Your Honors. I was in the process of explaining the spread of impunity in the Philippines, and I will resume, Your Honor. The plague of impunity. The victims also wish to convey that if the judges of this honorable chamber can be subjected to online harassment by Duterte clones, we should imagine the level of vulnerability the victims are exposed to in their poor villages. Your Honors, there is only one solution to stop the impunity propagated by Mr. Duterte from continuing to bring harm and suffering to the victims. And that is for this honorable chamber to confirm the charges so that witnesses can testify and evidence can be presented on the horrible crimes committed by Mr. Duterte. The testimonies and evidence presented will inoculate these mini Duterte'S from the virus of impunity that has infected them. When they will see and hear the utter cruelty, the sheer brutality, in other words, the brazen inhumanity of the crimes committed by Mr. Duterte, and the humanity of those whose lives were violently taken, it will rekindle the embers of humanity that still remain in their hearts. Many of these mini Duterte's or Duterte clones are actually victims of massive doses of fake news widely circulated online. They need to be vaccinated with the truth, and the truth vaccine can only come from the testimonies of witness of victims and evidence presented in a trial before this court. Truth is the antidote to the virus of impunity, Your Honors. The victims dread a future where charges are not confirmed in this case. It will mean that the virus of impunity will continue to spread and infect many more. Victims fear that Duterte clones will become an even bigger group that can elect another apostle of impunity as the Philippines' next leader. If that happens, an even more serious condition of impunity can take place in the Philippines, possibly worse than the orgy of violence that happened from 2011 to 2019, and this time there will be no ICC to run to for assistance and help. The victims humbly beseech this honorable chamber to reaffirm the two crucial objectives of the ICC identified in the preamble of the Rome Statute. First, to prosecute and punish the most serious crimes that deeply shock the conscience of humanity. And second, to put an end to impunity and to contribute to the prevention of crimes of unimaginable atrocities. If this chamber confirms the charges, this court will achieve its first objective of prosecuting and, if convicted, punishing Mr. Duterte for the unspeakable crimes he is charged with. But achieving the first objective will not automatically make this court attain its second objective. Merely putting forward the evidence gathered and the theory of liability of the prosecution will not necessarily resolve the second objective. This court should allow victims to testify, and the record of the proceedings must in the Philippines, but even reflect, but even the harrowing experiences of those impacted by victims to testify, and the record of the proceedings must reflect the harrowing experiences of those impacted against humanity. It is the brutality, in other words, the utter inhumanity of the crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte, so that the people who adore and idolize him, the people who have become disciples of impunity, will see for themselves the inhumanity of the suspect. For this to happen, the charges should all be confirmed. The virus of impunity that has spread all over the Philippines is very grave and serious, Your Honors. Imagine a leader like Mr. Duterte, who proudly and publicly proclaimed his aspirations of following the footsteps of Adolf Hitler when he said, quote, "Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now there are 3 million drug addicts. I'd be happy to slaughter them," unquote. And yet, He is worshipped by a huge number of Filipinos. In so many countries, you will need to hide your adoration of Hitler. Mr. Duterte flaunted it, and his fanatics are unaffected by it. Mr. Duterte has pronounced so many other horrible declarations meant to promote and encourage impunity, as it will be detailed tomorrow by my colleagues. And yet, he is idolized by a multitude of Filipinos. The defense will claim that he was merely bombastic and acerbic when he made these statements. But if he were merely being pompous and flippant, the people who were killed should be alive and laughing today at his supposed pranks and stunts. Mr. Duterte did not only order the mass killing of people suspected of being drug personalities, Your Honors. He smeared them with accusations of being rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals. Mr. Duterte imposed an inflexible condemnation that if you are a drug personality, you are automatically a dangerous criminal who has engaged in unimaginable atrocities. The families of those killed did not only suffer the loss of a loved one, their families were even disgraced with being associated with a rapist, murderer, or dangerous criminal. Even after their loved ones were murdered, many families were subjected to deplorable injustices. Instead of gunshot wounds as cause of death in their death certificates, families were shocked to see pneumonia, heart attack, stroke, sepsis, and other false causes of death that were instead written down. Other families were charged substantial amounts, sums the impoverished families could not afford, just to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones from the funeral parlor who were suspected by the families of being in cahoots with the police officers. Some family members were even arrested and imprisoned by police officers on false charges and for the purpose of preventing them from complaining. In one particular incident, Your Honors, a young man and his common-law wife were sleeping in their shanty when men in civilian clothes knocked down the door to their house. The men dragged the wife out of the room. The husband was already surrendering, and he even started to strip naked to show he had no drugs or firearm on his body. He said in the Filipino language, "Sir, malinis po ako, maghuhubad ako, sir." Translation in English, "Sir, I am clean. I will strip naked, sir." Still without mercy, the men shot and killed him. After killing the husband, they arrested the wife and accused her with falsified and non-bailable charges. When the deceased mother and cousin went to the police station to find out what happened to the young man, because they were not in the scene of the crime when it happened, the two were also summarily arrested and charged with fabricated crimes. If the Honorable Chamber confirms the charges in this case, the witnesses and evidence will show that those who were smeared by Mr. Duterte before they were killed, they were inside their houses, sleeping peacefully with their families, eating meals with their loved ones, playing with their children, or hugging their wives. Others were merely walking along the street, having snacks at the roadside eatery, or plying the road, earning a poor man's living. They were all doing ordinary, peaceful, and plain human activities. Confirming the charges will restore the dignity of those who were killed and the honor of their families. The prejudice suffered by the families of those killed did not begin and end with the killings of their loved ones. Each killing set off a chain reaction that is continuously churning out a daily crucible of harm, damage, and loss. By masterminding the mass murder of mere suspects, Mr. Duterte has brought irreparable and endless harm to the families. An overwhelming majority of those killed were the sole breadwinners of poor families. These families were dependent on each day's wage for their daily sustenance, They were hand-to-mouth families. With the death of their breadwinners, the widowed spouses, a majority of whom are women, have had to take on the roles of two parents. On top of taking care of their children and maintaining the household, the widowed spouses now have the additional burden of being breadwinners for their families. Families have been driven to even far more serious destitution, Your Honors. The damage to the children is immeasurable. Their development and upbringing have been permanently compromised. They have been walking through life with one missing parental limb. Losing a parent under very dire economic conditions and under the most violent circumstances results in wounds that will never heal and that will absolutely render them handicapped for life. And then there's the indescribable anguish of parents who lost a child. No parent is supposed to outlive a child. Parents suffer a lifetime of grief when a child dies ahead of them, and the lifetime grief is unimaginably worse when a child dies under the most inhuman circumstances. The crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte did not only affect individuals but whole communities. Across the Philippines, numerous urban communities of the most impoverished villages were scarred by the violence and abuses wrought by a lawless anti-drug campaign that further worsened the misery and trauma of residents in marginalized communities. In one illustrative instance, Your Honors, after the father of a family was killed inside his house by police officers, the entire neighborhood was so traumatized that for almost 3 months, and during the coldest months in the Philippines, they abandoned their houses at night and instead slept in the open public market. They did not feel secure inside their houses because there would be no witnesses if the police would just barge in and shoot at them. In the public market, the presence of many witnesses, they thought, will deter the police from shooting and killing them. It is also the victim's view, Your Honors, that the charges should be confirmed because the resulting presentation of witnesses and evidence during the trial will force police and other law enforcement officers to confront the brazen depravity of the killing of civilians that they either personally committed or allowed to be committed during the Duterte reign of terror. In one operation, the police summarily killed 3 men, 2 brothers and 1 friend, in the very early morning. The police declared that the 3 were nanlaban. They fought back. But the neighbors saw otherwise. The whole neighborhood was so horrified at the macabre treatment of one of the fatalities. The bullet-ridden body of one of the 3 men was brought out from the 2nd floor window and dropped to the ground because the police could not bring the body out through the doorway. When the body hit the ground, the neighbors recoiled at hearing the body emit a cry, "Aray!" Translation in English, "Ouch!" The man was still alive when his body was thrown to the ground, and the police just left him to bleed to death. The trial will hold a mirror to the police force and compel them to see how they were turned into executioners and assassins, and their organization transformed into a gigantic criminal organization or turned into a killing machine by Mr. Duterte. The Philippine National Police and the drug enforcement agencies have not made any initiative to purify the corrupted minds of their officers and personnel to our knowledge. The trial in this case will be a tremendous teaching opportunity that can work to rectify the warped and depraved minds of Philippine security officers. The charges need to be confirmed, Your Honors, for the sake of the entire country, which has been desensitized or made numb by the massive incidents of impunity and the glorification of impunity promoted by Mr. Duterte. The whole Philippines needs to know the real story during those bloody years, there has been no opportunity for the entire country to really find out the whole truth of what happened. It has been hush-hush, tidbits of sporadic news, and always drowned out by trolls who mass produce and broadcast false, fake, and fabricated news. The victims also attach a very important historical significance to this case. If the Chamber confirms the charges, the trial proceedings will produce a historical record of the most bloody period of post-war Philippine history, a duty that the Philippine justice system has refused to perform. The historical account on the mass murder of so many Filipinos during the Duterte regime needs to be accessible to our future generations, just like the Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo trials, so that they will learn from it and not repeat the same mistake of selecting and glorifying leaders who preach and practice impunity. The prosecution has presented 78 instances of murder and attempted murder, clarifying that these incidents are only representatives of the extent of the crimes committed against thousands of civilians, Your Honors. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember that Mr. Duterte's bloody rule, both in Davao City and nationwide, resulted in as many as 30,000 victims of killings, more than 300,000 victims of arbitrary imprisonment, and unaccounted numbers of victims of torture, sexual assault, and other forms of crimes against humanity. For many families in the Philippines, the charges brought for confirmation in these proceedings represent only a fraction of the reality the victims have endured. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember the hundreds of thousands of victims are banking on vicarious justice from this case. Finally, Your Honors.
Excuse me, Counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. Finally, Your Honors, the victims wish to humbly underline that what is ultimately at stake in these proceedings is the supreme of all forms of human rights, the right to life. The right to life is the very foundation of every civilized society. The ancestors of every nation fought against invaders, colonizers, despotic monarchs, and fascist leaders in order to secure the right to life of their families, their communities, and the future generations. The heroes of every country sacrificed their lives to defend the right to life of their people. We as citizens of modern societies are inheritors and beneficiaries of the sacrifices of our ancestors who bequeathed to us the right to life. We owe it to them to defend the supreme legacy for our generation and for the generations to come. For the past few years, Your Honors, we have seen an increasing number of nation leaders who time-traveled from the Dark Ages and now swagger in modern times as if they own people's lives. These brutal and cruel leaders must be held to account for their brazen disregard of humankind's right to life. Our ancestors fought in the battlefield to secure a right to life. In these modern times, the battleground for the fight to protect our right to life is within the four walls of this honorable court. May the God of life, the God of humanity, guide the honorable members of this chamber. Thank you, Your Honors.
Merci beaucoup, Maître.
Judge Motok, thank you very much, Counsel Butuyan. Now over to the defense. Mr. Kaufman, please.
And I thank Mr. Butuyan for his intervention. But I feel that I ought to remind him that this is a court of law which decides matters on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of political demagoguery, and not on the basis of a desire to effect regime change despite the democratic will. And certainly not on the basis of statements made by Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remulla, who professed that domestic justice will be denied, according to Mr. Butuyan, because of the lack of forensic reports and police reports. Now, I don't know which case Mr. Butuyan's metaphorical ship sailed into, but he clearly hasn't read the evidence. Whilst he was speaking, we examined the evidence, and out of that evidence we found at least 35 reports substantiating 49 of the incidents which are mentioned in a document containing the charges. Your Honours, Rodrigo Duterte was and will always remain a unique phenomenon. His style of statesmanship was novel and unpalatable to many. His expletives and hyperbole grated, while his honesty and wild popularity irritated. He spoke openly, from the heart, sincerely and truthfully. And what a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bong Bong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Let me remind everyone of the letter which President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed, it's on the screen, and in which he gave a cast-iron undertaking that his government, and I quote, will not assist the ICC in any way, shape or form. Well, as we know, he failed to keep that promise. Rodrigo Duterte was unconstitutional and unceremoniously hauled off to The Hague. And when called upon to defend his master's actions and the said letter at a Senate committee hearing, the then Secretary for Justice, once again Mr. Jesus Crispin Remula, persisted with the same dishonest theme. And I quote his words, "We did not assist the ICC. We continue with the very tenor of the letter that we did not assist the ICC and we did not have any contact with them." So he said, but with a document emanating from the prosecution team opposite and disclosed to us a mere week ago, not as information material to the preparation of our defence, but as exonerating evidence, we can now substantiate what we have suspected for a long time. The document comprises a transcript of a telephone call covertly recorded between 4 parties who cannot be mentioned in public, and one of these parties was boasting about how he was acting as the silent partner of President BBM, managing a scheme to funnel witnesses to this court while all the time ensuring that he could guarantee President BBM's plausible deniability. So it is indeed the defence case that President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. set out to neutralise Rodrigo Duterte and his legacy. Yes, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, I used that legendary word, neutralise, so central and so essential to your case theory, because you know just as well as me that I'm using the term metaphorically. And now I turn to the substance of the charges, but before I do, a word or two about the geopolitical context. The scourge of illegal narcotics is not unique to the Philippines. As we all know, it afflicts Latin America, where I can name 3 countries where the death rate at the hands of vigilantes and law enforcement agents per capita population is higher than it ever was under Duterte. And as you should know, and you will hear from the prosecution, at any rate, the Philippines as a country is uniquely positioned to act as a transit hub for the trafficking of narcotics emanating from the cartels in China. And with or without Duterte, so we argue, the death rate would have kept on rising. Indeed, as we will prove with statistics and reports, the death rate flowing from narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left.
Sarap batukan ni Kaufman, no? Loading.
From narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left power. And where, I ask you, has the International Criminal Court been seen that Rodrigo did anything? The totally lawful Duterte campaign against illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was...
No, wait.
their legal
do anything. The totally lawful Duterte campaign against illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was
Nawawala talaga. Wait, guys.
Illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was
Sa ICC yan, ha?
use personal income taxes for work of the poor, setting out the right to adequate food, decent shelter, education, and a highest standard of health. The fact that the majority of those who died as a result of drug-related crime were living in the most deprived areas is something which is endemic to every afflicted illegal drugs and their suppliers. But can anyone seriously accuse this man? This is the man who at the age of 5 arrived in Davao to live in a modest shack where rain leaked through the roof, forcing him to crawl under the kitchen table to take shelter. This is not the man born with a silver spoon in his mouth and groomed for the presidency from childhood. This is the man who was born to a lawyer and a governor who taught him discipline, values, and respect for the people by being one of the people. This is the man who, as president himself, shunned the luxuries and the privileges of high office.
Shame
and
on
like
you.
others before him, and even those after him, he slept not in the palatial grandeur of the Malacanang, but in Spartan quarters of his bodyguard's hut. His diet consisted not of prime cuts of imported Australian beef, but of dried fish and boiled rice. A man of simple indulgences, his pleasures were to be found not on the cocktail party circuit of
Values,
Forbes Park,
palamura.
but on coastal roads where he roamed and cruised on his motorcycle, not looking for people to kill Mr. Prosecutor, but almost killing himself because of his love for speed. This is the man who paid and paved his way through law school, passing his bar exam in 1972, more or less on the same day as Marcos Sr.'s tanks were grinding and rolling their way through the streets after the declaration of martial law. And it was on that significant day that Rodrigo Duterte was exposed to the tyranny of oppression and the abuse of power by the elite. And he took a decision. On that day, he chose to devote himself to a life of selfless public service. As a professor at the local police academy and as a public prosecutor in Davao, Rodrigo Duterte developed a lifelong passion, some would say an enduring obsession, for law and order, something for which he unapologetically enforced throughout his time as mayor of Davao City. Not, as the prosecution say, through sowing on no less than 7 occasions, but over more than 2 decades. And throughout his 20 or so years tenure as the mayor of Davao, Rodrigo Duterte and his family transformed that city from an outpost of communist insurgency and criminal violence into what is now one of the safest cities, not just in the Philippines, but in the entire world. This was indeed the so-called Davao model, which the prosecution wants to persuade you was code for unbridled criminal violence. And this was the type of leader that the Filipino nation wanted in 2016. So, Rodrigo Duterte was elected into power, not in spite of, but specifically because of his firm and uncompromising commitment to upholding law and order. And after his election as president, Rodrigo Duterte remained a man of the people, without seeking to patronize the people. Gung-ho in his ways, and with a belligerent tone, he spoke the tough tongue of the street, not the dissembling discourse of international diplomacy. He said what the people wanted to hear, but he said it in a way that offended sensibilities of world leaders unaccustomed to hearing it, one in particular, and that was what set him on the slippery slope to a prison cell in The Hague. And let me tell you how it works. It starts with the media, controlled by the powerful and the politically influential. With a sensational headline and a twisted editorial slant, the moguls sell their papers while promoting the partisan agenda of their backers in power. They highlight the salacious content while ignoring the true context, because that is what captivates the reader. And so it was with Rodrigo Duterte, whose speeches were fertile fodder for his enemies and detractors. A man whose hyperbole, bluster and rhetoric, once published, became a natural target for privately funded NGOs and human rights activists, a loose collective more commonly known as civil society. These people descended upon the Philippines to advance an agenda even more lacking in objectivity than that of the media. And heavily funded by tycoons with even grander designs, they print their glossy reports, replete with iconic photographic images of grieving families and dead bodies in rain-swept, nighttime crime scenes, all dramatically illuminated with the fluorescent glow of neon. Images carefully crafted to shock the conscience and to sway the emotions, and, I may say, to be used by the prosecutor when they don't even relate to the charges. And they gave their slick reports bold titles lifted straight out of a James Bond movie, such as License to Kill, One Shot to the Head, You Can Die Any Time, or simply, They Just Kill. The photographers are feted and their shots exhibited as art all over the world, and the brave journalists who act as their sources win awards and Nobel Prizes. And slowly but surely, their narrative becomes the sacred, unchallengeable, and unshakable truth. And so the pressure builds up, and the academics who haunt the corridors of the progressive left law faculties far away in the United States tweet their research and publish their articles pontificating about crimes against humanity, systematic attacks against the civilian population, and they point their finger at one man alone, and bandy about slogans such as accountability and the prevention of impunity. They give their gratuitous advice on what should be done, sometimes academics who formerly worked alongside the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Communications and complaints are filed, and the rest, as they say, is history. In any event, we're not gathered here today to judge a man on the basis of his coarse attitude or his vulgar language. This court has convened a confirmation hearing to verify whether substantial grounds exist to believe that Rodrigo Duterte, the people's president, together with various so-called co-perpetrators, over the years of his governance, devised a criminal policy of wholesale and wanton murder. And since we are in a court of law, it is worth stressing, although I should not have to, cases are decided on the basis of evidence, not supposition, not rumor, not spicy gossip, and certainly not on the basis of political rhetoric and bluster. Because at the end of the day, were it not for those belligerent and controversial speeches, there would have been no impetus to bring the people's president to The Hague. And when the prosecution's evidence is examined, I would ask you to keep an open mind and to question not just whether that evidence has been selectively presented, but whether there exists evidence which the prosecution has failed to produce. And I say this with justifiable cause, particularly with respect to the Duterte rhetoric. As we will prove during the substantive part of our submissions, the notorious speeches on which the prosecution relies have been cherry-picked to suit its narrative while ignoring the many other speeches when the former president tempered his bombastic language by clear reference to the principle of lawful self-defense. We, the defense, have read as many of these speeches as we can find. In fact, in our poky little office on the top floor of the furthest building away in this complex, we have a counter which ticks and ticks. And whenever we come across a speech which contradicts the prosecution's murder theory by reference to self-defense, we give a cheer, and the counter goes up once more and we celebrate one more nail in the coffin of the prosecution's case theory. As the statistics stand as of today, in contrast to the 20 speeches on which the prosecution relies to prove incitement to kill, we have found 35 more which say the complete opposite. Let me give you 2 examples from the very speeches that the Deputy Prosecutor himself cited today. Let's refer first of all to the famous Pietà speech, which the Deputy Prosecutor referred to. So, this is what the Deputy Prosecutor said. Those of you who are still sober, those who haven't tried illegal drugs, if you don't want to die or get hurt, don't rely on the priests, including human rights advocates. They won't be able to prevent deaths, and so it goes on. But if we look further on in the very same speech, something which maybe the Deputy Prosecutor didn't do, this is what he had to say. To our police officers and other officials, do your job, and you will have the unwavering support of the Office of the President. I will be with you all the way. Abuse your authority, and there will be hell to pay, for you will have become worse than criminality itself. Well, there you are. You have it straight in your face. Pexo, exonerating evidence within what is claimed to be the prosecution incriminating evidence. I won't take up my time by showing you the second speech, but there is one. If I have time at the end, I will show it to you. So if you add to that another 10 speeches out of the 20 speeches on which the prosecution rely in its document containing the charges, after all, we are in a court of law and we rely on evidence. And what is the evidence that's produced of these speeches? 20 of them. 10 of them, I submit, and we will show this in the substantive part of our submissions, contain exonerating evidence which support the defense case theory. In other words, if you add the 10, which we've identified in the prosecution's 20, to our total of 35, we come to 45 speeches versus 10, which we say support the use of force only in self-defense. That is 350% more speeches in favor of our defense and 354% more reasons not to confirm the charges. And you can bet your bottom dollar that at the end of today's proceedings, either the victim's self-styled legal assistant to ICC counsel or a prosecution intern will be tasked with scouring the web, looking for the means to prove Kaufman wrong. And I will declare it, and I'll declare it loudly and clearly, as if the prosecution didn't know it already. It's not enough to state that since the former president made those extremely inflammatory statements and deaths occurred, that he must, as a matter of course, be criminally responsible for those fatalities. At this stage of the proceedings, the prosecution needs to show substantial grounds to believe that the former president actually desired and foresaw that people would be killed as a result of his incendiary language. For the prosecution to assert that Rodrigo Duterte hoped for deaths to occur or was recklessly indifferent as to whether deaths would occur, which he was not, that's insufficient. So once more for the record, Rodrigo Duterte's language was aimed not at suspected drug pushers as the prosecution would have it, but directly at those poisoning society with their substances, and not, I stress, with lethal intent. His rhetoric was calculated to arouse fear and obedience, to instill fear in their hearts, and to inculcate a respect for the law in their minds. Nothing more, nothing less. That was his intent, and it was not criminal. And as many of these drug pushers demanded to enter prison, I remember seeing the images on the television, lining up to surrender and to enter prison. Now, I challenge my colleagues opposite to prove otherwise, because as we all know, in a criminal process, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They brought this case and they need to prove it. Rodrigo Duterte need not convince the world of anything, and that is to his fortunate advantage given his current medical condition. He stands behind his legacy resolutely, and he maintains his innocence absolutely. Now, I turn to the general fairness and objectivity of the investigation, which, as we all know, is meant to be an impartial evidence-gathering exercise. As an ex-prosecutor myself, I'm used to investigating agencies, pursuing all reasonable lines of inquiry, assimilating all testimonies, and digesting all documentation and forensic evidence, recommending who to target for prosecution, but not so with this prosecution. When we, the defence, study the course of the investigation in this case, one thing is plain as a pikestaff. The chief prosecutor of this court, Mr. Karim Khan, not only failed miserably to carry out his duties under the Rome Statute, requiring him to examine exonerating circumstances as well as incriminating, but he single-handedly contaminated it, so we alleged, by pursuing a one-track crusade with a view to a predetermined objective. Let me explain. Although the ICC officially authorized an investigation into the so-called Philippines situation in late 2021, it was deferred a few months later back to the Philippines for the official investigation to resume only in late 2023. But the real meat of the investigation into Count 1, relating to the activities of that fictitious construct, the Davao Death Squad, had effectively started way before then, with the sole objective of nailing Rodrigo Duterte. Indeed, all the way back in 2018, during its so-called preliminary examination, the prosecution had an individual who will be referred to as P1 handed to them on a silver platter. This P1 had been interviewed at an earlier date by none other than Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, in his former capacity as a private lawyer, and the self-professed legal admiration of his fellow citizens, the very same citizens who continued to re-elect him time after time. In late 2021, it was deferred a few months later back to the Philippines for the official investigation to resume only in late 2023. But the real meat of the investigation into Count 1, relating to the activities of that fictitious construct, the Davao Death Squad, had effectively started way before then, with the sole objective of nailing Rodrigo Duterte. Indeed, all the way back in 2018, during its so-called preliminary examination, the prosecution had an individual who will be referred to as P1 handed to them on a silver platter. This P1 had been interviewed at an earlier date by none other than Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, in his former capacity as a private lawyer, and the self-professed legal
Pinutol guys kasi puro BS yung mga pinagsasabi nitong si si Kaufman. Pinutol pansamantala.
Rodrigo Duterte's role as the mobster in chief. The same
So wait na lang natin. Magre-resume din yan kasi meron pa mga binabanggit na hindi po magandang pakinggan. Si Kaufman, paldo. Paldo si Kaufman. Wala pa eh. Oo, puro BS yung mga pinagsasabi. Kaya pinutol pansamantala. Oo, pero magre-resume din yan mga ka-GP Natics. Yun ay introduction pa lang ni Kaufman. Magaling, paldo eh. Argo, sinusulit yung bayad kay Kaufman.
Her preparation. And what was this information with which Karim Khan had helpfully provided her? A book on which the prosecution relies as evidence. A trashy, scurrilous item of pulp fiction entitled Duterte Harry. Your Honours, the picture on the front cover of that book says it all. It really does scream objectivity, doesn't it? I say that sarcastically, of course. Fortunately for us, the defence, the appeals chamber, has now disqualified Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan from this case. A welcome development as a matter of ethical propriety, but in our opinion, too late in the day to salvage the integrity of the investigation that he had supervised. An investigation in the course of which he concealed his former role as the victim's counsel, who had deemed our client a suspected murderer as far back as 2018 and right up to the very day before this pre-trial chamber issued its arrest warrant. Your Honours, over the next few days, we hope to convince you of the wholly insufficient nature of the evidence against Rodrigo Duterte. We will show you that the paltry number of speeches on which the prosecution rely do not manifest criminal intent. We will also convince you that as hard as they tried, the prosecution's investigators couldn't get even one of its criminal cooperating witnesses, whose reliability is next to zero, to admit that they heard the former president, Rodrigo Duterte, give an order to kill at any time relevant to the charges, or with respect to any of the incidents. And we hope that when you conclude your deliberations, Your Honours, that you will dismiss these grievously misplaced and politically motivated charges. We will ask you to send Rodrigo Duterte back to his family, and we will ask you to give back to the Filipino people their tatay digong. Thank you, Your Honours.
The presiding judge. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufman. We shall now suspend. This is the end of initial statements, and this is the end of this morning's hearings. We will take a 90-minute break and resume at 2 in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
O, ayan guys, magpahinga muna tayo, no? 90 minutes break daw. So, ibig sabihin, 1.5 hour. Mga kababayan ang aantayin natin. So, wala na tayong maipapakita niyan. So, tayo ay pansamantala muna na magpapaalam, mga ka-GP Natics. Magandang gabi po muli sa inyong lahat. At tayo po ay magbabalik mamaya, no? Makakabalik ba tayo? At subukan natin kung makabalik tayo mamaya, okay? So, salamat muli sa inyong lahat, mga kababayan, at magandang gabi.